Today we've got Martin from Three Choirs Vineyard. Three Choirs Vineyard produce the Cotswold Hills wine, which the grapes are from our own vineyard at the university. So we have a good relationship with Three Choirs, and we do a lot with them. So I thought it was a fantastic opportunity to get them in. Wine is an interesting subject because it's a growing industry in the UK and it has a fantastic future. So over to Martin.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Hopefully you can all hear me. If I dip in and out, then I apologise. If you suddenly can't hear me at all, then let me know and I'll stand closer to the microphone. I think the idea is I'll tell you a little bit about Three Choirs and about the industry and where I think it's going. And then I think it's probably far more interesting if we open it up, and if you want me to talk about something or have some points, then we'll just open it up and people can ask questions and I'll keep talking. So just a little bit of background for you. Three Choirs planted the first vineyards. It was actually my father-in-law that planted the first vines in 1973. It was at a time when a little bit of farm diversification was becoming interesting to farmers. The owner of the farm at the time, it was an apple and blackcurrant farm. The owner was a gentleman called Alan McKechnie, who also had a wine shop in the local town of Ledbury. And so my father-in-law and he decided that it would be good fun to plant up 1/2 acre of vines. So they did that, and it takes 3 years to get a crop, your first crop. And I can't see all your pictures, but some of you might be old enough to remember 1976 as being one of the hottest summers on record. And in true British fashion, they thought, wow, this is great. This is here to come. This is here to stay. So let's plant up some more. So that's how Three Choirs sort of started, really. And sometimes I try and imagine what might have happened if 1976 had been a little bit like last year, and we probably wouldn't have had the same enthusiasm to plant up more, and it might have been a completely different story. But at the time, there were a few other vineyards around, but not that many, and it was a very, very difficult thing to market. Three Choirs have always had a presence in the tourism department ever since we started planting the first vines. We were open to the public. They used to drive down the lane and knock on the door and buy a few bottles of wine. And really, right from the start, we sold about 25% of our production directly to the public. So and we've been through various phases as the industry has developed and as tourism has gathered traction as well. We've moved with that, and we still sell about 25 to 30% of our production directly to the public. We'll talk a little bit later about how the routes to market have changed a little bit over the last few years, but fundamentally it's a key part of our business is the tourism side, but also very, very important to get the wine out into the trade and get the name of Three Choirs known to everybody. So the trade sales are also fairly critical to us, and we've been very lucky in having good, supportive customers that we've worked with for a long time, whether that's the Wine Society, Waitrose, and quite a few others as well. But it's a much easier product to sell now than it was in the 80s, for example. But it didn't stop us trying to expand, and we very quickly grew up to 25 acres. It was at a time when there were new varieties coming on stream that were developed in Germany, especially for cool climate winemaking. We realized that Germany were the net importers of wine, and so they had a very, very keen interest in pushing the boundaries of grape growing. So these new varieties were coming out that were more easy to grow. They were easy to grow, not quite organically, but with less inputs into the vineyard, and gave a more regular yield. And those were varieties called Sauvignon Blanc, Phoenix, Orion, Regent and Rondo. So that then became our problem, in that these varieties were not particularly well known, not particularly fashionable. And at a time when the industry was developing, everybody knew Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay, but they hadn't a clue about the varieties that we were growing. So the marketing side had to be quite astute, and we had to find ways of getting people a little bit more interested in English wine. So rather than calling the wines after the varieties, we developed names for the wines. So Three Choirs, for example, have a range of wines called Coleridge Hill, Willow Brook. May Hill is probably one of our biggest sellers because of the name, because everybody can look out from the vineyard and see May Hill in the distance. So we've gone away from trying to tell people too much about the varieties we grow, but actually talk more about the style and the journey of English wine. I would say that in the 90s, it was very, very difficult. The marketplace was very much either directly from the vineyard or through the supermarket sector. So we were stocked in Waitrose, was one of the first ones we were in, but also Sainsbury's, Tesco's, Morrison's, Safeways. So we covered quite a wide range of supermarket shelves. The problem in those days was that people were very confused between English and British, and the English wines would get put on the bottom shelf next to British wines, and there's a big difference. And it's a big problem with an awful lot of products, not just wine, but the word British has been a little bit compromised because it doesn't mean what it should mean. So we have the English and Welsh wine industry, not the British wine industry, because British wine can be made from foreign concentrate that's brought over to the country and fermented in this country. So it's very, very cheap wine, sits on the bottom shelf, the sort of thing students would take to a party and leave on the table and drink at the end of the night if there's nothing else left. Things like Concord, Rougemont Castle, famous names for the student drinker in the 80s and 90s. Then something really fundamental started to happen that really helped to launch English wine a bit more. We started to win a few awards for producing sparkling wines, and all of a sudden people started to perk up and look at the potential for producing wines that could rival the quality of champagne. And that happened at around about the same time as the public started to become far more interested in local produce in provenance. In the 80s and early 90s, I think that there was almost an anti-feeling towards British produce. Selling an English apple was very, very difficult because French Golden Delicious would hit the shelves looking perfect before the apples ripened in this country. And so actually getting people to drink English wine was quite a challenge, because after all, wine comes from France. But then as we got into the late 90s and into the early 2000s, we started to see farmers markets getting a lot of traction. And all of a sudden, people realized that there was some really good produce on our doorsteps. And that's really followed through over the last 15 to 20 years. Increased awareness of provenance. We had the horse meat scandal, which probably focused people even more. And I think even now, when we look at our situation now with the terrible year or two we've had, we're looking more locally, aren't we? We're looking at what we've got around the corner and supporting local business and buying local products, not being quite so worried about saving 5 or 10p here and there. We want quality from trusted sources. So now we're starting to see the importance of conveying the right methods of production, the right way of actually growing and producing our product. Big word in the industry now is sustainability. So we've been through organics and biodynamics, which are still very important parts of our industry. But actually, you can be an organic farmer and not be particularly sustainable. So, and I think sustainability is a word that's really captured the public. I think they understand. They all have this slightly their own meaning, their own interpretation of it, but it's a word they understand far more than organic, probably. And I think that's linked into this whole crusade about protecting our planet and doing everything the right way. And so we've put a lot of importance on that in the last couple of years. We're one of the first vineyards to gain accreditation for the UK, the Wine GB sustainability standard, which, to be honest, is not very hard to do at the moment, but it's actually a journey. So we're there, we're registered, we're carbon negative in the vineyard, and we've got work to do in the winery, but we've got something on our label now, which will be coming on new future vintages, which will show that we're actually trying to grow things in the right way and do the right things for the sustainability of the industry and the planet. So they're quite exciting things. It's nice to have something new to talk to customers about. And our customer base is a very loyal customer base. We've got a good mail order list, people that buy our wines again and again. Once you get a customer, you don't want to let them go. So we do communicate with them quite a lot. Last year, 2/3 of the wine we sold direct from the vineyard would have been sold mail order. Saw a huge increase in mail order business last year. And the big debate is whether that's here to stay, or when we return to normal, will we all go back to the old ways? And I think there's probably a little bit of middle ground there. I think that mail order will still remain quite an important part of the business. But the key for us is to get people to come to the vineyard. As we've developed with our with the tourism's changed enormously over the years as well. So when we first started, we used to have people turning up in their cars and buying a bottle of wine and going home again. Then we saw people coming out in coaches for parties and outings, probus clubs, women's institutes, all of these sort of groups and clubs would come out, fill a coach up and come out, and we'd give them a ploughman's supper and a glass of wine, and they'd all buy a bottle of wine and go home. That then faded as people started to get more independent. They decided that they didn't want to go on coaches, so coaches started to come out only half full, which made it uneconomic for them. So coach loads of people disappeared, but more and more people turned up independently in their cars. So we then had to find ways to entertain those people at the time that they arrived. So we developed the restaurant so that people could sit and eat when they arrived. We had tastings on, and we did tours 2 or 3 times a day. And that's really carried on now, and that's how we're developing the business. And then when COVID struck this time last year, we were already struggling to find a way forward in our tourism, because we were finding we're quite rural here, and I don't think it's just us. I think it's a common problem across the hospitality industry, in that lunchtime trade is far more difficult than it used to be. The whole idea of having time for lunch when you're at work is disappearing. We actually grab a bite to eat whilst we're working, or just take 10 minutes, 15 minutes. The idea of a social business lunch is not really the done thing now. And certainly drinking at lunchtime is far less acceptable than it used to be 10 or 20 years ago. So the lunchtime trade has become very difficult. And we took the decision, we were just mulling it over when COVID took place. We were just thinking of actually closing the restaurant at lunchtimes from Monday to Thursday, and only opening up over the weekends. And that was sort of forced upon us because of COVID. But by doing that, we were able to reduce our overheads enormously. we had to have 2 chefs, and all of a sudden we only needed 1 chef, and chefs don't come cheap. And then, so we decided now we couldn't have people coming in off the road quite the same way, but we were still able to offer hotel rooms and a limited service. So we suddenly found our hotel rooms, which we've got 8 hotel rooms and 3 lodges at the moment. So 22 people a night. We've been fully booked right the way through from when lockdown was ended last July, right through until we were locked down again in November. Every night we had 22 people staying, and we suddenly realized that actually they were having a far better experience and going away buying a lot more wine than if we were just getting loads and loads of people in off the road and almost processing them. So our new business model is to actually not go too far away from what we ended up doing last year, because it's been really, really successful. People have a good experience. They go away thinking very highly of Three Choirs. They're buying wine. They're not afraid to buy wines at a higher price. And the whole model seems to work really, really well. On the trade side, you might think that that's been an absolute disaster, because all of the hotels and restaurants have been mostly closed. On trade has struggled. So yes, we've done a lot less through our normal trading channels, with the exception of our main customer, which is the Wine Society, who are a mail order company, who've gone absolutely berserk this year and moving more wine than ever. So we're able to work with them and put more wine through direct to consumer. And we've got a really good relationship with them. They have their own mail order list, obviously. And but a lot of their members will come to us directly for their wine as well, and it all sort of works really, really well. So that's really how we've arrived at where we are now. We also do, another side of our business is contract winemaking. So David mentioned that we were making wine for the Agricultural University, and have been for a few years now. And that's quite an important part of the work that goes on in the winery. We produce about 200,000 bottles of our own wine, and we produce another 200,000 for other vineyards that bring their grapes to us for us to do the winemaking for them. I've always said that that our industry is split very much into 3 sections. You've got those that do the growing, you've got those that do the selling, and in between you've got those that do the making. And generally speaking, people are very, very good at one of those things. They become experts in that field. They get by with the second, and they're absolutely hopeless at the third. And therefore, they're better off leaving it for somebody else to do. And in our industry, that seems to be the making side. People love to do their growing. They love to go out in the vineyard and do the pruning and nurture and produce a good crop. But then they want to hand it over to somebody who's got all of the equipment, has made all of the investment to make the best possible product out of that season. And then they're very proud of that product, and they're very good at selling it. So that's the business model that really works for us on that side. That helps us to spread our overheads in the winery, and it helps us to justify having the best possible equipment in order to put the best wines into bottle. So I don't know if I've talked for 20 minutes. I feel like I've talked. I can't see many of you. You've been you're muted and shy, so I don't know whether you're still awake or not. I haven't left a gap at all for anybody to have a word, but it's probably a good time just to make sure that I'm going down the right route. Maybe you'd like to have a few questions or make a few comments.
Okay, thank you, Martin. If you want to put the questions in the chat box, or if you want to, we could open the mics and you can talk. While you do that, I have my first question, which I've been dying to ask. Sparkling red wine.
Yes.
explain to me how that works or how you got there, because I think it's fantastic.
I've just been well, I haven't been criticised for it. It's one of those things. We're just putting together a 5-year plan at the moment, because I have to admit that I've been given a lot of rope to hang myself on in the winery. So pushing the boundaries and trialing things is a very important part of what we do. But actually, it has to fit in with what the rest of the business wants. And so I have been guilty of suddenly appearing with a new product and everybody being a little bit surprised by it. So I've got to be a little bit more careful about some of the things that I do. But innovation and sort of trying new things is a very important part of what we do. We can't stand still.
I think it's really important, and I think a lot of industries that have strong tradition, tradition tends to stand in the way of innovation, because that's the way we've always done it. So it's fascinating to see that you are innovating these new products. So how was the wine taken by consumers?
Well, we produced a very small amount of it. I think we had about 1,000 bottles in total. We launched it we thought it was probably more of a Christmas product, so we launched it in October, November. We've only sold it through the shop and mail order. And I think people are very polite, aren't they? And so the people that have commented have been very favourable. They've been very excited by it and have enjoyed it. And it is a strange product. It's a niche within a niche. And but if anybody can make good red sparkling wine, then it ought to be a marginal climate like the UK. So I've got good acidity in the grapes when they come in. And this one I think worked quite well. One of the problems with making a red sparkling is that the whole idea of sparkling wine is to avoid a lot of contact with the skins. So you don't want the bitter characters that you get from the skins, like tannins and things like that. So you need to get clean juice away. And this is where the varieties that have been developed for us are quite interesting. So that red wine that I made was made from a variety called Regent. And Regent is one of those varieties that I mentioned at the start when I was talking about Germany developing new varieties. They call it Regent. But it's very unusual because it's a red wine, a red grape with a red juice. Most red grape varieties actually have a white or a pink juice. So things like Pinot Noir, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, you need to extract the color by fermenting it on the skins. So and then you get tannins, which makes it unsuitable for red wine, for sparkling wine. So by having a red juice, I can treat the grape exactly the same as I would a sparkling wine, white grape, and extract the juice without any skin contact. And that's the result. It did need a little bit more residual sugar than I'd originally thought it would. So it's not a bone dry wine. It needs the fruit, the sugar in it to bring out some of the fruit character. But it's an interesting wine, and I'm glad we did it. And we might do it again, but it's not. I don't have it. It's not a permanent wine that'll be on our list. It'll come and it'll go. I've actually got about 400 bottles left, and I was just discussing with somebody today actually that we might put those away and bring it back out next winter, because I think it's probably a more interesting leading up to Christmas.
Well, I'll be ordering some anyway. Adrian, would you like to open your microphone and ask your question, please?
Hi, Martin. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Yeah, I was just looking at your website, and I see, you mentioned the unusual red fizz. I see you've got a grape there called Siger Red, which even in my wine studies I've never come across. What's your consumer reaction been to something like that?
Well, when people come to the vineyard, you can explain things. So you can, I can show you the Siger Red vines growing, and you can taste the wine, and the two things fit very nicely together. The problem we have is that a lot of our varieties don't sound very English. The newer ones that I've been talking about, like Phoenix and Orion and things, are easy. But when you start talking about Siegerrebe, Reichensteiner, it becomes a little bit more complicated. So we will label up a wine with Siegerrebe as a single variety wine, and that's really only sold from the vineyard here, so that people can connect the provenance with the grape variety. The grape variety is actually a Germanic cross. Most varieties, when you go back through the family tree, end up at Müller-Thurgau. But Siegerrebe is actually a Traminer cross. It's an incredibly interesting variety for us. It's got loads and loads of aromatic character and a really, really short growing season. So it starts quite late, so it misses the spring frosts, and it ripens very early at the beginning of September. So it's got a very, very short growing season and gives us really low acid and really, really aromatic character. It's a Marmite wine. It's one that some people absolutely love and others find it just too aromatic and soft for them. But it's certainly got a place on our wine list, and it's grown far more in the southwest of the country than it is in the southeast. It suits our climate. This is another interesting thing, actually. We all talk about English wine as being one product, but actually there's a huge amount of variation across the country, different soil types, different terroir, different climates, and different grape varieties. And I think over the next 4 or 5 years, that will be the future, is that we won't stop talking about English wine, but our knowledge of different areas will become more. And we will start saying that we prefer the softer wines from the softer, fruitier styles from the southwest, or we prefer the slightly steelier, flintier styles from the southeast.
Wow. Richard, you've got a question. Let me just read that. Would you consider producing organically and or biodynamic wines?
I think the answer to that is probably no. I think I admire people that do it. I'm getting to the age now where I can remember things before organic wines existed. So when I first got involved, and actually right through until probably 2012, there was no such thing as organic wine. The correct definition or description was wine made from organically grown grapes. Now that didn't have a particularly sort of strong message to me, because there were no controls in the winery. Nobody could agree what the controls for organic wine production should be in the winery. And in 2012, they eventually did come up with a worldwide consensus. So organic wine does have meaning now, and it's mostly to do with sulfur levels. Most of our wines that we produced here would, from a winemaking point of view, would qualify as being organic. But I was not convinced that organic production actually enhanced the brand. For us, the provenance side and being able to produce the best possible raw material to make wine from was the most important thing. So we planted varieties that would grow with minimal spraying intervention and minimal inputs. So growing as green as we possibly could. But actually to go down the route of committing to organic and not doing something in the vineyard when you really needed to frightened me a lot. So, and it was probably possible to do with some varieties more than others. So then you start producing some wines that are organic and some that aren't. And actually, rather than thinking, great, I can charge more for my organic wine, I was worried that it actually highlighted that half of our production wasn't organic, and actually gave, you could argue that it could give a negative message across, in that some of you're spraying some of your vines. So organic and biodynamic haven't been high on our list. But as I said a little bit earlier, sustainability is a completely different issue for me. You can have an organic vineyard that's not particularly sustainable. You can have a sustainable vineyard that's not necessarily organic. And I just think there's a little bit more of a pragmatic approach that takes the finances and the environment and the economics all into account.
Okay, thanks. We've got Katie Duke next. I think you know Katie.
I do. Oh dear, here's a complicated question coming.
Oh, it's not, don't worry. It's just wondering how you found customers' reaction to canned wine, and out of your white, rosé and red canned wine, which one's been your best seller?
Well, cans has been an interesting journey. We started doing it, the first people to do English wine in a can were called Uncommon, and they went in with a 250 ml sparkling wine, not dissimilar to somebody else I know, and it seemed to gather quite a lot of attention, but I felt that it was quite expensive. Just from the size of the can being 250 ml, I thought, wow, this is, we're asking people to pay quite a lot of money, especially when you start selling it in London and it goes through a few hands before it reaches the consumer. I think even our little cans were selling for about £10 each in the National Gallery. So, you know, they become perceived as being quite expensive, which isn't necessarily a bad thing for your brand. But we went for a 187 ml still wine. So we wanted to create a difference and be the biggest market we felt was for still wines, and the technology was there to do still wine in a can. So we did trial it. We trialed it with the people we work with in London, who supply most of the mostly on trade, and it started to work really well. There was quite a lot of positive feedback. I would say that the dry white probably was the largest seller. Last year, we were destined to expand quite significantly with our cans, but then obviously things happened and there were no festivals, no outdoor events, and so nobody wanted any cans. So it was a bit of a struggle. Then when we thought we were out of the woods in July, August, we thought, well, we better produce some more. So I asked our canning people to line up some production for me. And they told me they couldn't find the 200 ml can anywhere. The demand for cans had gone through the roof. Everybody was producing beer and cider for the retail outlets. And so the canning plants were all producing 440 ml and 330 ml and a little bit of 250 ml. But they had no time or inclination to be doing the 200 ml unless you wanted to buy 500,000. So we took the decision to change size and go to a 250 ml and relaunch the products as 250s. And it was quite interesting how that opened up a different market. And the 187 ml seemed to go into a slightly different market, very much on trade, whereas the 250 ml is far more retail, has far more retail potential. So we're now finding, having had to move to 250 ml, that the sparkling is actually gathering a little bit more traction. So I would say out of the wines that we've done in the 250 ml, probably the sparkling, the semi-sparkling white has gone the best.
Lovely, thank you.
So it's a long answer to a short question, wasn't it?
Okay, next we've got James O'Connell.
Hi, Martin. Thank you very much, David. Really interesting talk, Martin. Thank you very much indeed. My question is slightly more on the sharp business end of it. You said right at the beginning that you saw the industry in three very distinct sectors, sort of the growing, the making, and the selling. My question is really about that. I've done work as a lawyer for a number of wineries in Sussex, and there does seem to be quite often a quite different attitude between those who just grow and those who grow and make. And those who grow and make tend to adopt a more, when I say more professional, I'm not being discourteous to the growers, but a more of a sort of business edge to it. So constantly, I find that some of my clients are dealing with that they'll have wine that's in the middle of being processed by the winemaking facility. So it'll be halfway through the process, and the grower will have sold it to somebody else and not bother to mention that fact to the winemaker. And then the person who's bought the wine, the third party, says, well, I haven't got a contract with you to pay for storage or whatever, or provide labels. And it's a constant headache, this mismatch of professionalism. Is that, are we just unlucky down here in Sussex, or is that something that is ongoing?
No, that's a difficult one, isn't it? I think it's the industry has changed enormously over the last 20 years. I mean, my father-in-law was a farm manager. He loved growing, and he grew things, and then turned his attention to how the hell are we going to sell this? Whereas I think probably people that are getting into the industry now can see the marketplace and the market potential, and are saying, right, how can we supply this marketplace? So there's a slightly different emphasis, and I think you're exactly right, that the people that have got wineries and have a little bit more of an aspiration from a marketing point of view are probably by nature bringing a little bit more professionalism to the business, and a little bit more, if they're creating bigger businesses, then it needs structure, it needs protocols, and so these are things that the bigger vineyards now must have in place. And to supply, even going down into the trade and supplying them, we all now need to have our certificates for SALSA and BRC, and they're wanting sustainability accreditations and this and that. So you tend to get a more professional operation because they're slightly bigger. People start to focus on one area of the business. You're either involved in marketing or you're involved in growing. Whereas a lot of these smaller customers that we have are growers fundamentally, who produce a grape, but they also do all of the picking themselves, they do all of the pruning themselves. They then open up the shop and sell their wines as well. And they're just not used to having the structure in place that the larger vineyards need. So I don't think you're on your own, but I do think that it's up to the larger vineyards and people that take grapes in to know exactly who owns what, and make sure you've got proper contracts in place. Yep. And
thank you very much.
I would say once you've got from my experiences, once you've got a customer as a contract for contract winemaking, there's only two reasons why you will lose them. One is because you completely cock it up and produce a bad product for them, and therefore they have no confidence in your abilities and move elsewhere. And the other one is that they're so successful, and tourism demands that they have their own winery and their own facilities, because that opens up more opportunities to sell directly to the public. So they have aspirations to put in their own winery and make their own wine. It's the only two reasons people move. So the key to us with our contract winemaking is to actually encourage people to come here. So knowing who's planted grapes and when they're going to be producing their first crop, it's quite an important part of our research, and actually letting people know that we're here and available to make their wine for them.
Thank you.
Okay, our next question is Simeon. Do you want to ask that, Simeon?
Sure. Martin, you were mentioning how your business model changed. At first, people arrived on coaches, and eventually you saw that people are now arriving with cars. And I'm wondering, with HS2 and the new rail links between London, Birmingham, Leeds, I realize they're very long-term plans, but do you see customers taking the train and arriving at the vineyards and staying at the lodge? And Yeah.
An interesting one, isn't it? I think that the reputation of the rail network has to improve, and we've also currently got the small problem of the fact we're 15 miles from the nearest railway station. So we would. That's not to say that we can't offer a pick up and drop off service if the demand was there. It's been quite interesting during lockdown to see where people come from to stay with us, and it's far more local than it was. When we first opened up after we'd been closed after the first lockdown, we were having people coming and staying the night from Gloucester and Cheltenham. They just wanted to get out. They didn't want the hassle of traveling. They wanted a getaway, but they didn't need to travel miles and miles for it.
Right.
As things eased a bit, we've started to see people coming from further away, and a lot of people coming from London who just want to get out of the mass population and just see some fresh air and no people and some greenery. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I think day trips are far more possible from people, places like Birmingham. It's not far for us to. So I think we could see a bit of a change there, but I just think the public transport system's got to be far more positively received before that happens.
All right. I have a second question, but I think Sebastian has a question first.
Yeah, let's go to Sebastian next. Let's give him the opportunity.
I was muted. My favorite wines to drink are Beaujolais and South Burgundies. And I've noticed when I was working in a wine shop, we had a couple of customers come back saying that Gamay was great. It had like a slight effervescence and they thought it was off. So I was just thinking with your sparkling reds, do you ever notice this in some of your wines, or are you when you're making your sparkling red, are you doing like the secondary fermentation you do for a champagne?
Yeah, all our sparkling wines are all done by the traditional method, so it's all done champagne method.
Fine.
So it's more than an effervescence. You've got different levels of fizz in wine. So
yeah,
your traditional sparkling wines, champagne and carvers and proseccos and all of these wines that are quite high in dissolved CO2, they're done by second fermentations, and there will be 4 or 5 bar of pressure in a bottle. The next level down is semi-sparkling. So we were talking about the cans a bit earlier on. The most pressure, you can't get 4 or 5 bar in a can. So it becomes semi, if it goes below 3 bar, then the classification is semi-sparkling. So wine that we put in a can would be semi-sparkling, and it would be made by adding CO2. That's the only way you can do it. So the actual definition of the wine is, I think, have I got a can? I've got a can here. I've been very diplomatic. I've got a can of very, very good can of wine here. And the actual description, if I can find it, is an aerated semi-sparkling wine obtained by adding carbon dioxide. So there's the legal definition. Now, if you keep wine cold, then it holds on to CO2. So if we've got a cold winery, and if we bottle wine when it's still cold, it could have what you referred to as a little bit of an effervescence, a little bit of pétillance, which we think actually adds a little bit of crispness and freshness to the wine. So we quite like it. If you don't like it, then you can decant the wine and it will very quickly disperse. But it's in the old days, we used to decant a lot of wine. Nowadays, we tend to drink it straight from the bottle. And the other thing that's changed, which you've got to remember, is that room temperature was very different 50 years ago to what it is now. You know, we've all got central heating now. We all use fridges, so we chill our wine too much before we drink it. And if it's room temperature, then it's a lot warmer than it used to be. Old houses have cellars, and the temperature was very consistent, and wine was always drunk at sort of 10 to 12 degrees. But our habits have changed.
Wow. Okay. So we cut back to Simeon.
Sure. Thank you, Martin. I recently bought white sparkling wine from England, and I don't know the different options we have. So the one we bought with our group of people was Nye Timber.
Right.
And I mean, it's the first time I even heard of an English sparkling wine. I've heard of champagne and prosecco, but I was wondering if Three Choir Vineyards sees Nye Timber as producing a similar caliber product, if you see them as a competitor or not.
I think we probably see. I don't know that we might see them as a competitor, but not in a bad way. There's plenty of room for all of us. Nye Timber have done a huge amount to increase the reputation of English wine around the world. It's been a huge investment, and they're one of those people that has taken the industry from a humble agricultural industry to a very professional, very well received industry. So they've done a huge amount to help our cause. They've pitched themselves very much at the top of the ladder in terms of trying to produce top quality and charge top prices. And if you look at their label, I don't know whether they've changed now, but I haven't seen a wine for a while. They didn't even used to put the word English on their label. They weren't trying to be English. They were trying to be the best sparkling wine in the world. So the fact that they were in England was almost a side issue.
From memory, I don't have the bottle here right now, but I remember it said something like, this is proof that even in England we can make sparkling wine of a similar quality to champagne. But there was mention of England.
Yeah. So I think that now the English industry's moved on. They are far more pro-English, if you like. But it was planted by an American, and it was the wine was made by the French. It's just that the vineyard was in England.
All right.
But it's evolved now. It's been sold 3 or 4 times. And the interesting thing about, especially for them, they sell wines when they've been matured for quite a long time. So, it's not unusual to find a Nye Timber wine that's 5 to 10 years old. Well, you're therefore seeing a wine that was possibly made by a previous winemaker or even by a previous owner. And so where they've got an incredible reputation, they've won some fantastic awards, but what they don't have that we have is a sort of almost a family business that's actually very focused on being friendly to the public. They're far more interested in the trade side of things, I think.
Okay,
Thank you.
Over to Sebastian for his second question.
You make the wine every year, and do you sell it straight away every year within the year? Do you declare every year, or you kind of, if the quality is not very good, will you sell it under a lesser label or wait and blend it or something some other time?
We have different ranges of our wines. We have our lowest range. Well, let's start at the top. We have when we can, we will produce the best wines we can with single varieties like Bacchus and Siegerräber, which we can do virtually every year. They're normally good enough. 2 years in 10 we'll produce a noble harvest. The other 8 years we'll produce a late harvest. Pinot Noir, we'd probably produce a single variety Pinot Noir 4 years in 10, 5 years in 10. So that range of wines will only be produced when the quality allows. And that tends to be set by the weather patterns for the season and ultimately the quality of the grapes when they arrive at the winery. Our mid-range are blends. And so we can create consistency by blending different varieties in order to create a wine that's very similar to the year before. So our consumers aren't frightened by massive changes. Those will be produced every year. but they might have a slightly different blend. So one year it might have 50% of one variety, the next year it might only have 30%, but the whole idea is to try and produce something that's fairly similar. Then we have our entry level, what we call our entry level, which is just, we basically call that our English House Dry and English House Medium Dry. That goes generally into the on-trade in that sort of house wine sector. So they're good wines, but they maybe not as full in character as some of the other varieties. So they appeal, they're acceptable to a wider audience, if you like. And then at the bottom, we've got brandy. So if I've got grapes that don't make the grade, or I've got too many grapes and I really don't want to put it all into bottle, then we send it off for distillation and we mature it and sell it as brandy. So there's not a lot of money in it, but it's a way of keeping our quality up in our wine range, and also producing a top quality product out of grapes that are not quite right for winemaking. So that's a really, really useful sluice gate, if you like, which stops us having to make wine when things don't quite work out. So it's really important to not try and fool the public and produce stuff that you shouldn't be producing. I will admit I've done it a couple of times and regretted it in the past, years and years ago. There's wines I can remember where we took the decision to make it, and then afterwards I wished I hadn't. So generally we're far more strict now, is that if the quality isn't there, cut your losses early. Don't force it. Don't put it into bottle and ruin your reputation. It only takes one bad bottle to lose a customer.
But does the brandy not fall in quality if you use the lower stuff as well? Would it be better if you used higher grade wine as well?
Generally not, because when you're distilling it, so all you're actually extracting is the alcohol. So much of it is, I mean, don't get me wrong, you can't send vinegar off and make fantastic brandy, but at the same time, grapes that are slightly, generally speaking, it's grapes that don't quite make the grade in terms of sugar levels. So when you distill it, you're not getting very much alcohol out, so you're actually getting quite a low brandy yield, but you're actually intensifying the fruit characters in it, and England's really well positioned to produce some quite nice fruity style of brandy.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to Hannah. First time, Hannah.
I'm one of the new product development leads with the Cotswold Hills team. I'm doing it for the second time. But I've been doing research into potentially doing screw top or cork with the new sparkling, and it was a discussion that we started actually having last year and never really came to a conclusion on it. And I'm struggling to find prices of cork or the difference between cork and screw top on using on a sparkling. What would you say? We'd be back considering.
If you're looking at sparkling wines, the sparkling wine we've made for you is a traditional method sparkling. Yeah. So it has it's going to have 4 or 5 bar of pressure.
Okay.
So you don't have an option other than to put a cork in it. Screw caps are okay for semi sparkling wines, but once you get up to 3 bar plus, you wouldn't put it into a normal bottle with a screw top.
Okay.
So I think you need to accept that it's got to be a cork.
Okay.
What you do have the option of is your designs of your the cage that goes over the top of it, you know, the little bit, the wire cage.
Okay.
Which you can choose colors, and you can even have them slightly branded if you wanted to, but you've got to have a certain volume done, and then which color foils you want to put over the top of that in order to match your label. So I'm afraid the current sparkling decisions are sort of almost made. If you wanted to make a semi-sparkling wine, then you could look at doing that in the future but you'd have to start off with this year's crop.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're back to Sebastian next. Sebastian, you are on mute.
Sorry. Your Noble Harvest, you said that was 2 years out of the 10. Have you just called it noble because it's a higher quality, or has that got anything to do with botrytis and noble rot?
It's to do with botrytis, and which is why we only go that far, 2 years in 10. Generally speaking, it tends to be the riper seasons, but it's important that the word noble is synonymous with botrytis and botrytic character.
Okay. We now move on to James.
Hi again, Martin. Just your comments earlier about drawing people in. I spent many a happy day when I was in America going on day trips to Napa Valley and just going up and down the valley to the various vineyards, and it was the sheer number of vineyards there was a draw in and of itself. And certainly down here in Sussex, we've got the vineyards are sufficiently close that if they were acting in collaboration, I suspect it could draw an awful lot more people. Any thoughts on that as a concept?
Yes, are you lucky or unlucky in the southeast because you've got a higher density of vineyards? We quite like the loneliness of the Cotswolds and not having any other vineyards too near us. There are some smaller ones around, but there's a sort of shortage of destination. So in a way, it's quite nice. But then I can also see from my travels around the world the huge benefits of this collaboration and actually being an industry working together. And I think certainly the southeast have the ability to do that. You've still got problems of transporting in between. If you're wanting people to have a drink and enjoy, but there's no reason why with accommodation and things you can't get together and join forces. You said about the Napa Valley, the place that I absolutely blew my mind was Franschhoek in South Africa, where they actually have a train. They have a wine train. It's a wine tram that goes around, and you just buy your ticket for the day and you get on it and you go around all of these vineyards and you hop on, hop off, have a drink, and the industry is incredible. And they end up back in the town at night time and go and have a meal in a restaurant. And yeah, it's just it shows you what is possible. But at the end of the day, you're all competing for that customer that's going to buy the wine. So finding like-minded people is not always that easy. And I think especially in our industry, in people that are mad enough to set up a vineyard and invest all of their money in a vineyard also are slightly focused and want to do things their way, is my experience.
I definitely concur that it's an industry of individuals. Thank you.
Okay, our last question is from Sebastian again. So last question of the evening, over to Sebastian.
With regards to your bottle shapes, do you choose bottles from? I mean, if I look at France, you have a different bottle from. I mean, you can have a different bottle from each village in Burgundy, or even a different appellation. Even, how do you choose your bottles? Are you designing new? Are you taking inspiration from where the grapes you're using are grown, or what are you doing?
It's been an interesting one actually, because when we first started producing wine, we went into a Hock bottle and a Moselle bottle, very tall and thin. Yeah. And most of the people that were drinking wine in this country in the late 70s, early 80s were drinking German wine. There's a book my father-in-law showed me in the early years called Thank God for Liebfraumilch. And it was all about how Liebfraumilch wasn't actually sold in Germany. It was rubbish wine that the Germans didn't want, but put a bit of sugar in it, send it over to the UK, and the Brits will drink it. And it got people drinking wine. And so once you've got into wine, you then start to look at different things, and all of a sudden we've become a wine drinking nation. And but then we had a few blips along the way. One of the biggest ones was the Austrian wine scandal, where they were actually putting ethyl alcohol into the wines to sweeten them up. Antifreeze, they called it. And well, it wasn't quite antifreeze, but it was similar. And that killed the industry overnight. So we immediately changed the shape of our bottle to dissociate ourselves from German and Austrian wines. And so we then started to put our wines into Bordelais bottles and Burgundy bottles and try and associate ourselves far more with the New World. And that's how the English industry has developed since then. The problem with having your own bottle that nobody else has got is that it's very expensive and it doesn't fit your machines. So we are very limited. If you want to be a commercial producer and buy machines that will cope with the bottles, and you want to be able to buy bottles off the shelf, then you are quite restricted in what's available. And on the, running alongside that, you've got the difficulty that there's to make your product look as good as possible, using a heavier weight of glass and making it look absolutely very, very substantial and really look the part. You're actually going against the sustainability, packaging waste and all of these things. So you've really got to get the balance right. And we've gone down the route of trying to let the label sing rather than the bottle itself. But bottle shape is interesting. Our Pinot Noir we put into a Burgundy bottle. Most of our other wines we put into Bordelais.